I have the honor of inviting Mr. Rajendra Singh Pawar, Chairman and co-founder NIIT Group. He is the recipient of Padma Bhushan Award. His contributions to the development of India's IT industry have been widely acknowledged. May I now request Mr. Pawar to introduce Professor Sugata Mitra, our keynote speaker, and invite him for his keynote speech on disrupting education with Gen AI. Over to you, sir. May I request Professor
Sure.
Yeah.
So thanks, Neha. I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about a friend and fellow traveler, Sugata Mitra. It would have taken all the time we have the session to talk about him, but I'll just take a minute because he has his main talk to deliver. Sugata is among the most awarded educationists of his time. He's received many global awards, including the Devang Mehta Award in India in 2003. He's the first recipient of the TED Prize, $1 million TED Prize 2013, the Brock Prize in 2022, and many others. His work on children's education include The Hole in the Wall at NIIT, 1999, which inspired by the famous movie Slumdog Millionaire. And then he did many subsequent experiments where children access the internet in unsupervised groups. These experiments and these ideas have influenced children's education all over the world. Since the 1970s, Professor Mitra's publications and work has resulted in the training and development of millions of young people, amongst them some of the poorest in the world. He's a professor emeritus at NIIT University in Mitra. He's a PhD in theoretical physics from my alma mater, IIT Delhi. And he retired in 2019 as professor of educational technology at Newcastle University, where he was from 2006 till 2019. In between, in 2012, he was a visiting professor at the MIT Media Labs in Cambridge, Massachusetts. His NIIT relationship goes back to almost the inception of NIIT. He joined NIIT around November 81 when we were just forming the company. He spent a little under 3 years in the first stint and then returned 6 years later. And from 1990 till 2005, he was, like he was earlier, as this fountainhead of new ideas for us. And then from 2005, he got connected to the university we were going to create, and 2009 it was created. And since 2019, he's Professor Emeritus at the NIIT University. And the most important line is that he is my favorite thinker. So with that, over to you, Sugata.
Thank you, Raji. Thank you, Professor Gopalan. Favorite thinker. I'm still trying to figure out what connection that might have. Actually, it does have a pretty deep connection with what I'm going to talk about. So, as you saw, the title of the talk is Disrupting Education with Gen AI, which I think is a little overly dramatic. But the real story is actually even more strange than that dramatic title. I'm going to share my screen because I will need slides to talk about what I have to talk about. So let me get to the slides. Okay. All right. Okay, I think we're on. So there we are, disrupting education with generative AI. What on earth could that mean? Well, and you might think, well, what do I have to do with that topic? Me, because my background, yes, my background is in physics. I have worked with education, as you just heard, for over 30, 40 years. But generative AI, why? What would I have to do with that? Well, just to explain before I launch off, I did my PhD in physics, theoretical physics, in 1978 in IIT Delhi. And at that time, physicists and mathematicians were the only people who knew how to write computer programs. Computers were, of course, very different. They were huge things. Anyway, so we knew how to write computer programs. So whether we wanted to or not, and I was fascinated by it. So then I drifted off into education.
Recording in progress.
And here I am at the junction of two rather unusual subjects: education and computer science. So how did I get there? Well, I'll tell you the story very briefly, because it does have a bearing on our main topic, and then we get into the business of generative AI. There were some signs that something was going to happen to education. And I happened accidentally to have plunged into the middle of all of that, quite without knowing what I was getting into, a long time ago. 25 years ago, in 1999, I did an experiment which is often called the hole in the wall. It's a very simple experiment. It's just that if there are no teachers, if there's nobody to teach anything, then what would happen if we just stuck a computer into a wall in a public space and left it there, and make sure that the computer is at child height? You can see this picture of what happens. Children crowd around it, and you would think that they would sort of do nothing about it, but that's not what happened. The story has been told again and again. What actually happens is the following. We found that if you give unsupervised access to children in a safe and public space, that's very important, okay, safe public space, then groups of children can learn to use computers and the internet by themselves. Now, that was actually, in those days, not such a great piece of news for NIIT, whose business was to teach people how to use a computer and the internet. But there were these results, and I published them and eventually wrote a book about it. A fascinating story of how the internet enables learning. 16 years ago, in 2008, I took the results from the Indian experiment into England. I was then working with Newcastle University in England. And I took the same idea and implemented it into the schools in a relatively less affluent part of England, northeastern England. And I called it a self-organized learning environment, or a SOLE, S-O-L-E. Self-organized because, it's unsupervised. All you have is the internet. And where would children go with that? Well, a few years of experiments later, here is what we found. Given an engaging question, a really interesting big question or an idea, children can use the internet to learn anything by themselves. And hold it. People would stop me at that point and say, "What do you mean anything?" And I said, anything. Read those experiments. I've tried everything. As many complicated subjects as I can. It doesn't stop. I wrote another book. This time it was called It's a tiny book. It was called Beyond the Hole in the Wall. And one of my heroes, Nicholas Negroponte of MIT, wrote the foreword to it. And he said, you know what you've done? You've made it possible for these children to learn how to learn. At the same time, I got another contact from another hero of mine, Sir Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer, the late Arthur C. Clarke. And I met him in Colombo. He heard the whole story and he said one of those lines which has become kind of quoted everywhere. When children have interest, education happens. You don't have to make it happen. You don't have to force it. It just happens. 14 years ago, I ran into another problem. So it's fine. You give children computer, give them the internet, you give them a really interesting question, because remember, they have to be interested. Otherwise, the whole thing doesn't happen. But who is going to give them that question if they don't have any teachers, or if they don't have any teachers who are, good enough to make up a really good question? Well, I thought, why not have them Skype in? Skype was big in those days. So I said, why can't I can have people who can beam in into a remote location, ask a question and said, I'll come back tomorrow, you give me the answer. We called it the granny cloud, because, these were retired school teachers, many in England. I published that, and a large number of people joined in into what is called the granny cloud. It operated for about 10 years, from 2010 onwards to 2020, until those grannies started to become too old to carry on. And then it got handed over to various smaller organizations all around the world. Just as self-organized learning environment spread everywhere in the world by itself, so did the granny cloud. This is where teachers can beam themselves across space and sometimes across time. 10 years ago, I put all of those ideas together. I did that because I got this prize, the $1 million prize. That was a bit too much for me. So I took the whole $1 million and I gave it to the university, gave it to Newcastle University. And they, in turn, funded a set of experiments called the School in the Cloud. The idea was to create dedicated spaces for self-organized learning. And we created them in India, across the length and breadth of India, in the UK, northeastern England, and in the US, to start with in Harlem, New York. It's an idea that educators continue to sort of struggle with. Just leave them alone. What about curriculum, etc.? In the School in the Cloud, there is a curriculum, but it's a curriculum of questions, not a curriculum of answers. You know what a normal curriculum is? It's a list of things that we already know. So in today's world, you would say, well, if we already know, those things are all available on the internet. Why are you taking money from me? So instead, if you make a curriculum which is made up of questions to which no one knows the answer, then even the internet doesn't know. And the only way you can address it, not with teachers, because teachers won't know the answers either. The only way to address it would be through a school in the cloud. 5 years ago, in 2019, as we all know, the virus attacked. And it attacked not only people, it attacked institutions, it attacked education particularly badly. It destroyed the system. I was in the thick of it. People would, ask, what happens now? I mean, the children are not going to be in school for years. Classrooms got destroyed. And we were left with no choice except to say education must happen anywhere and at any time. And how can that happen? Well, only if it's self-organized. I wrote a tiny book on that, saying that we are not going to buckle down and destroy our education system. So I called the book Virus versus the Internet. The establishment, unfortunately, the educational establishment reacted with absolute horror, particularly in England. What? By themselves, no curriculum, only questions. What kind of nonsense is this? Even today, that debate goes on. In those 2 years, children lost a lot. They haven't learned anything. Their reading abilities have got decimated, etc., and so on. But anyway, it could not be stopped. I'm quite happy to say it could not be stopped. By 2020, just about everyone had a smartphone or a device. As a friend of mine put it, the hole in the wall is in every hand. What do we do now with those things? We learn to do, and then we do everything with our devices. So if someone tells you, can you cook a nice vegetable and cheese baked dish? You don't say, I'll have to figure it out. You just pull out your phone. So that's where we were, quite pleasantly, until 2022, 2 years ago, generative AI appeared. So what is generative AI? Generative AI is actually a big artificial neural network. What's a neural network? I really need to say this because not everybody is familiar with that. But if you look at that picture on the screen, that's what it looks like. On the left, you have input neurons, those 3 little dots. Then you have the middle, which is called a hidden layer. And then you have the right-hand side, which is the output. That's all. You just shoot some numbers into the input. The numbers travel boom, 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 boom to all the other nodes, and then out into the output. At each transmission, the numbers get changed a little bit. And out comes the output. And you look at the output and say, that's not right. And you feed it back. That's called back propagation. And the network adjusts those numbers again until it gets it right. And you do that millions and millions and millions of times. Here's a neural network which I made a couple of months ago. What it does is it takes the coordinates of a point, 3 numbers, and tells you how far away it is from the center. Why I'm showing you this is you shoot the 3 numbers in from the left, they get transformed according to those little numbers you see on each of the hidden layers, multiplied by those things, and then shot out into the output. And lo and behold, the output tells you how far away it is once it's trained properly. But is it actually solving any equation? Well, of course not. It's just a bunch of numbers. I was quite disturbed by this. What is this thing? How does it do this? Neural networks are not like anything we have created before. If you build an engineering thing, like a clock, and it goes out of order, and you call a repairer, and the repairer says something, and you point to a particular cog wheel, and you say, well, what does that for? The repairer said, that is for this purpose. But not in a neural network. In a neural network, we know what it does. We don't know how it does it. And possibly we cannot know how it does it. But think of it yourself. You can recognize faces. But do you know what's happening inside your head? when you recognize a face? Just numbers fooling around. So what does generative AI do? Generative AI can teach, lecture, write, compose, paint, everything. What will it do? Well, first you have to understand 4 things. Okay, very important. I'm sorry I have to show you this slide because these are the 4 parts of the mind of generative AI. The first thing is called tokenization. If you want to teach a child to read, where do you start? The alphabet and words. But when you do that with a neural network, that's called tokenization. Why token instead of word? Because, commas, full stops, semicolon, they're all part of the whole thing. So instead of calling it words, punctuation, alphabet, we call it tokens. Embedding, even more difficult idea. The cat dash the mat. And I ask you, well, what could be the dash? And you say, the cat sat on the mat. The cat stood on the mat. The cat slept on the mat. How about cat ate the mat? No, that can't be. So cat and mat are closer to the word sat and slept than it is to the word ate. You do that, that's called training the AI. However, what if I said there was no food in the house except for some soup which had fallen on the mat and the cat ate the mat? The context can change which word is close to which other word. That is a very important concept that came out of the Google Labs. I believe it is fundamental. It's a breakthrough. It's called attention. And finally, you put all 3 of these things together, tokenization, embedding, and attention, and you start predicting what token will come next. And you say, in this case, the cat dash on the mat is the cat ate the mat. When we think, we predict what will come as the next word and the next word and the next word. Okay, I'll just be silent for a second. Okay, you think about anything. Can you see the words pop in one after the other? That's called token prediction. That's how Gen AI works. I wrote an article, again, very badly received, called The End of Knowing. Because I said, if you can ask your phone anything at all, and if it replies reasonably good English or reasonably good any language right now, and it always gives you the answer, then why do you need to know anything at all? Could this be the end of knowing? It's because we didn't have that kind of a device that we had to go through the 17 years of reading books and memorizing tables and blah, 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 blah. And people said, no, that's not what it is. Fortunately, I had only one supporter in the whole world. He's died now. But that supporter's name is one that I look up to very much. His name is Seymour Papert. And he wrote a book called Children, Computers, and Powerful Ideas. I salute him. But there's something wrong. Okay? Well-trained AIs with billions and billions of words, with all the text in the world fed into it, trained forever with powerful computers, does everything fine, like ChatGPT, except that every now and then it produces some very funny effects. 4 of them. It hallucinates. It makes up things which don't exist. It seems to be doctrinated. You might have read recently, somebody asked to draw a picture of a Nazi. And he drew a picture, except that the Nazi was black. And everybody said, what rubbish is that, etc. Anyway, doctrine, remaining within a limited data set. Verbose, it talks a lot to hide the fact that it doesn't know a lot. And finally, madness, losing connection with reality. Now, there's a picture of a gentleman on that screen and on the right-hand side. Some of you will recognize him. His name is Sigmund Freud. And I think he would have had a lot to say about it. So, what's going to happen? A symbiotic relationship, not disruptive necessarily, a symbiotic relationship between education and generative AI. Generative AI, in order to be sane, requires educational psychology more than computer science. And education, in order to be relevant, to not be the end of knowing, needs generative AI. Designers will need new skills. These are the new jobs that we need to prepare for. How to build a data set. What does that mean in English? If you have a child, then depending on what you read to the child will turn out one way or the other. The right data set. Assessment. How do you make out if you've got the right value system or not? To check if learning has actually happened. And recursion. What happens if learning has not happened? How do you correct? Now, these things are being done in computer science by computer scientists to make better gen AIs, generative AIs. But if you read the bottom lines, they are nothing but curriculum, pedagogy, and examination. Very familiar words. They are the building blocks of education. There are two subjects that need to talk intimately to each other. Gen AI and education will disrupt each other over the next few years in ways that we can only guess at. Okay? It will happen fast, really fast. It's happening right now. In 10 years or less, I think, artificial intelligence will be able to do everything that humans can do and do it better. So what does that mean? Does it mean the end of everything, the end of it all? And you've heard all the... Well, it's going to create new jobs. And those new jobs are about asking the right questions and about educational psychology and its effects on neural networks. Absolutely brand new jobs. So in the end, humans will continue to ask the questions to which there are no answers, as they have done since the dawn of time. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Sugata. As always, more questions than answers. But back to you, Neha.
Thank you, sir.